My name is Margaret Eleanor Whitfield. I'm 67 years old, 8 days after my daughter-in-law threw my suitcase onto the front porch and told me there was no room for me in the house I helped pay for. I walked into a bank. I sat across from a man in a dark blue tie. He slid a folder toward me and said, "Mrs. Whitfield, we've been waiting for you." I signed 3 documents. Then I went home, made myself tea, and waited. That evening my son Daniel called. His voice was different. "Mom, what did you do?" I said. "What your father asked me to do 8 years ago." He didn't respond, and neither did I. 8 years earlier, my husband Gerald was still alive. He was a quiet man, an estate attorney who believed in preparation more than emotion. We had been married 34 years, living in a white colonial house on Birchwood Lane. That last summer, before his illness worsened, he told me something I didn't understand at the time. "Margaret," he said, "when I'm gone, don't sign anything you haven't read, and don't read anything without James Calloway, his closest friend and law partner." I laughed it off. I thought he was just being careful. Gerald was always careful. Our son Daniel was 34 then. Recently married to Courtney, organized, efficient, always thinking in terms of value. When she first visited our home, she walked room to room, paused at the window, and said, "This is a good property, good bones." Gerald didn't respond, but I remember the way his face changed. After Gerald was diagnosed with Parkinson's, things slowly shifted. At first it was manageable, then it wasn't. Courtney became more involved, asking careful questions about accounts, ownership, the house, nothing direct, nothing obvious. But I started noticing the way she looked at everything, like it could be calculated. I said nothing. When Gerald died, the house became silent. Daniel was grief-stricken at first. Courtney was efficient. 3 days after the funeral, she asked about estate documents. 6 weeks later, Daniel suggested I sell Birchwood Lane and move in with them. "We'll build you a suite," he said. "You won't be alone." I told him I'd think about it. That night I went into Gerald's study. In his desk drawer, under old files, I found an envelope with my name on it. Inside was a note. "Margaret, everything is arranged. Call James Calloway. Say, the oak tree is still standing. He will know what to do. Trust him the way you trusted me." I read it 3 times. Then I called James. His office felt unchanged. Old wood, quiet air, heavy stillness. He didn't hesitate. He opened a folder and said, "Gerald prepared everything. Not just a will, a full trust structure, irrevocable, protected, private, the house, accounts, everything, already transferred into a trust years ago, and the sole trustee was me. Daniel was not listed. Courtney was not listed." James looked at me and said, "Your husband built a wall around everything and put you inside it." Still, I moved in with Daniel and Courtney. I said nothing about the trust. I wanted to see. Within days, Courtney placed a document on the kitchen table, a quitclaim deed transferring ownership of Birchwood Lane. "All we need is your signature," she said. I looked at it. "I'll think about it." Later, I overheard them talking. "The house is worth over 600,000, Courtney said. "If she signs, we can secure the new place." Daniel hesitated. "She loves that house." Courtney replied, "Love doesn't pay property taxes." That was all I needed to hear. That night, I called James again. "Start," I said. "Already done," he replied. Over the next days, I learned the truth. The trust made the property untouchable without my approval as trustee. Any transfer attempt would fail unless I authorized it. Every document Courtney prepared was legally meaningless. She didn't know it yet, but I did. Still, I said nothing. I let them believe I was uncertain. Courtney tried again. A cleaner version of the deed, more polished, more simple. I smiled. "I'll think about it." Then came the final step. At 11:50 p.m. one night, I sat in the guest room and activated the trust protections through James. 3 electronic signatures, 3 confirmations, everything locked, everything secured. At 12:03 a.m., Birchwood Lane was fully protected under trust law. I watched her expression shift as she listened. Then she looked at Daniel and then at me, and in that silence, everything collapsed for her. Not loudly, but completely. Daniel finally understood something was wrong, but too late. I stood up, picked up my bag and said, "I'm going home now." I returned to Birchwood Lane alone. The house felt the same, quiet, steady, unchanged. The oak tree still stood in the yard. Gerald used to say, "Don't sign anything you haven't read. And don't read anything without James." I thought he meant paperwork, but he meant protection. He meant foresight. He meant love that builds structure instead of speeches. Months later, Daniel and Courtney separated. I don't know every detail. I don't ask. Daniel came back once. He sat at the kitchen table and said, "I'm sorry." It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was something. James retired quietly the following year. He sent me a note that said, "Case closed." Now I still live at Birchwood Lane. The porch railing still needs paint. Some mornings I sit with coffee and look at the oak tree and think about Gerald. Not as someone I lost, but as someone who prepared for everything I couldn't see yet. He didn't leave chaos behind. He left structure. And in the end, that was enough. But there was one thing I hadn't expected. A few weeks after Daniel's visit, I found an old photo album while cleaning Gerald's study. It was tucked behind a row of legal books, hidden where only someone who knew the room well would ever think to look. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened it. There was Daniel at 6 years old, holding a fishing rod twice his size. There was Patricia on her first day of school. There was Gerald standing in the backyard beside the oak tree, smiling at something outside the frame. For hours I turned those pages, and I realized something. The greatest loss wasn't the house. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the betrayal. It was the distance that had quietly grown between people who once loved each other without conditions. The next month, Daniel called again. This time he didn't ask for anything. He simply asked if he could stop by for coffee. I said yes. He arrived carrying a small toolbox and a bag of flower seeds. I looked at him and smiled. "What are those for?" He glanced toward the garden near the porch. "I thought we could fix up the flower beds," he said. "Mom always loved seeing them bloom." For a moment neither of us spoke. Then I nodded. We spent the afternoon clearing weeds, turning the soil and planting new flowers where the old ones had faded away. The work wasn't perfect, neither were we. But sometimes healing doesn't begin with words. Sometimes it begins with showing up. I looked at him and smiled. "What are those for?" He glanced toward the garden near the porch. "I thought we could fix up the flower beds," he said. "Mom always loved seeing them bloom." For a moment neither of us spoke. Then I nodded. We spent the afternoon clearing weeds, turning the soil and planting new flowers where the old ones had faded away. The work wasn't perfect, neither were we. But sometimes healing doesn't begin with words. Sometimes it begins with showing up. As the sun started to set, Daniel sat beside me on the porch, the same porch where Gerald had once given me the advice that changed everything. Daniel looked out at the yard and said quietly, "Dad knew what he was doing, didn't he?" I smiled. "Yes," I said. "He usually did." Daniel lowered his head. I wish I had listened to him more. I didn't answer right away, because some regrets don't need a response. They only need to be acknowledged. We sat there together for a long time, watching the shadows stretch across the grass. The oak tree was still standing, strong, steady, unmoved by storms that had come and gone, just like the lessons Gerald left behind. That evening, after Daniel drove away, I stood alone on the porch and looked at the freshly planted garden, resting quietly in the fading light. For the first time in a very long while, the house didn't feel heavy. It felt peaceful. Not because everything had been fixed, not because every wound had healed, but because I finally understood something. Protection isn't about winning. It's about preserving what matters. Gerald protected me because he loved me. James helped me because he was loyal. And I survived because I finally trusted both of them. The house remained, the oak tree remained, and so did I, older, wiser, and grateful. Because sometimes the people who truly love us leave behind more than memories. They leave behind wisdom. They leave behind strength. And if we're fortunate enough, they leave behind a path home when the world tries to lead us somewhere else. And in the end,